host, Erin McFly. This week is our second part to the Atari two-part special I was planning on doing. There's been like a bit of a mix-up though, and I've been doing a bit of research into like the computers and stuff. Like I said last week I was going to talk about, and I've decided I'm going to bunch them together and talk about them some other time as an own separate episode, because I do feel like the 7800 needs its own episode. And as well, I don't feel like the computers really like tie in with it enough, so I'm just going to keep them a bit separate. So let's just get into it. So the 7800 was released in 1986, same year as the NES. It was supposed to actually be released in 1984, and they had like a tested release kind of thing going on, like Nintendo did in 1985. And a lot of complications with the company went about, and it didn't end up getting released, but we're going to get into that later. So, the Atari 7800 was supposed to be Atari's answer to the 5200 system, which didn't do very well. People were complaining because it was kind of just a bit of a rip-off. I think, anyway, as well, it was a bit of a rip-off. So they decided they were going to release a system which was better and fully backwards compatible. This was actually the first backwards compatible system which had backwards compatibility built into it. Before that, like with the 5200, you could play 2600 games on it, but you needed like an external sort of device to be able to do that with. But the 7800 eliminated that, and you could play 2600 games on the 7800, which meant that the 2600 kind of phased that out. So that's a really like good thing that they did there, and that's actually one of the reasons why I highly recommend this system to anyone who wants to start collecting retro games, because you can play some of the classics, in fact all of the classics from like the Atari era on the 7800s. So that's a really good little thing that they put in there.
Well, why was it called backwards?
Why was it like
Why was it called backwards?
Backwards compatible?
Yeah.
Because you could play games that were on previous systems. The only previous system they had was the 2600, so it was backwards compatible with 2600 technology. So that's why they called it that. There was a few things as well, like they were meant to include with this, like a keyboard and a cartridge which was going to be able to register like your high score on it and stuff like that. But they didn't end up getting released, which is a shame, to be honest, because a high score cartridge, like people couldn't store their high scores back then. So a high score cartridge would have been probably a really good idea.
It's kind of like the arcade games where you would like go into your local shop and,
exactly.
And it's like, I still got the high score.
Exactly.
That's me, I still got the high score, man. You know what I'm saying?
See, it baffles me why they didn't do that, to be honest. I couldn't really find anything.
It's a trick.
Why? But that would have been a really good thing for them to release. So, anyway, we're going to talk about the system itself physically for a little bit. So, the 7800 is quite similar to the 5200 with like the whole black thing going on that they had there, but the 7800's got like this strip of rainbow on it or something. It's got your basic power, reset, like pause buttons on the front, and it's got the classic Atari cartridge slot at the back where they usually all are. There was two versions of this system. There was like the, what was it called, the Pro system, which was released in the US, and then the EU, like the European version, which didn't have the Pro system on it. That was the only difference, is that the US version had Pro system and the strip was a little bit thinner, and then the European version didn't have the Pro system title and it had a thicker rainbow strip. Like, there's no difference. There is a difference, however, in the controllers. So with the US version, the controller is strange, to say the least. It's like a futuristic joystick. Or I like to see it as a futuristic joystick. It's like silver and it's got buttons on the side and the joystick in the middle. It doesn't look fun to use at all. It's really impractical, and looking at it I'm like, yeah, nah. You could see like where the other systems were at the time as well, because we had Sega released the Master System, Nintendo had released the NES, and their controllers were sort of what we see now with, you know, like the D-pad, although now we've got joysticks, but it was the D-pad and like the two buttons, the classic thing. and like Atari are bringing out a system which still uses a joystick. That's a bit strange, but okay. In the European version though, they ditched that and they brought out controllers that were more like the Master System's controllers. And I think I mentioned as well about the Master System, it had like detachable like little joysticks you could plug into the D-pad. Well, the 7800 had those as well, which I think is a nice little addition there. Makes it very like easy to play with the 2 buttons and the joystick. It's like a nice little setup. So that's pretty much just like how it looked. I'll get some pictures as well. The 7800 had improved graphics. It was a very powerful system, and some actually say it's more powerful than the NES, which is surprising considering how well the NES did compared to the 7800. So there's that. It could display something like 25 colours at once, and something like up to 100 objects moving at the screen at one time as well, which the NES couldn't do, I don't think. So that's like quite interesting when I learned that, because I was thinking to myself like, oh, this was the worst of the 3 that were out at the time. This was the one that was like underdeveloped and like not paid attention to, and that wasn't the case at all. It's a really high powered console. It just didn't do well next to the big Nintendo giant. So some games on the 7800, I did mention it was backwards compatible, but it did have releases for it as well. In fact, it had 13 titles announced when its initial release in '84, and those were Mrs. Pac-Man, Centipede, Joust, Food Fight, Galaga, Ball Blazer, I don't know if this is right, Rescue on Fractals, I think, Track and Field, and this is another one that I can't really pronounce. I think it's Xavius or Xavius, I'm not really sure. Robotron 2084, Desert Falcon, Dig Dug, and Pole Position 2. Now, some of those titles like you mightn't have ever heard of, but then there's things like Centipede and there's Pac-Man, which obviously were really popular games, really popular arcade games, and that's another thing that we're going to talk about with the 7800. Sorry, the arcade ports on it were amazing and were considered really good. Other consoles tried to do the arcade port thing, and it didn't really take off because they didn't really do it well. We can see this with the 2600 actually, when they tried to release Pac-Man, and it was a disaster, and that was supposed to be the console port of the classic arcade game, and it just completely flopped and it just didn't do well at all. The reason for them having these like really good arcade ports now is that this is their first system that's designed from an outside company, and that outside company is General Computer Corporation, or GCC for short. Now, GCC had like, I think they had some arcade machines going at the time, but what they actually did was release mod kits for arcade machines and things like that, and they also released enhancement boards for Atari games, which Atari didn't like, and they tried to sue them. And then they had a change in tune, as Atari tend to do, and they go with their usual if you can't beat them, join them tactic, and they ended up hiring GCC to work on the new system. Again, Atari have done this with Activision as well, and they end up joining up with Activision too, so it seems like they view their enemies as enemies for a while, and then they're like, we could actually use these people, maybe we should start paying them. So they hired GCC and they asked them if they could develop the chip for the 7800 and sort of design it and things like that. And they did. They developed the chip that was inside it, which was the most powerful at the time, and they also developed the first round of cartridges that was released as well. They made some arcade games while they were under Atari, like Quantum and Food Fight. So the arcade ports were so good because they hired people who knew what they were doing to do with arcades to work on the 7800, which further proves my point that this system was not neglected. So why did it not do very well? It throws me a little bit, but so Atari sound like they're doing well at the moment, but there's still a lot of trouble going on. There's always trouble going on Atari, as we found. Last week I discovered that Atari was apparently drug riddled at one point. I had no idea that was going on. But
What do you mean?
They were allowed to do drugs in the offices and stuff like that.
It is the 80s.
It was the 70s back then, so it's even, yeah.
Oh, that's even more drug riddled.
So there's still trouble at Atari. When is there never trouble at Atari? As I mentioned right in the very beginning, the system was initially released in 1984 and then got postponed. Why did it get postponed? Well, Atari had no money. Ray Kassar had resigned, and he was the person that actually managed to get the 2600 to sell as much as it did. He was the person that sort of created this huge franchise that was Atari. He pushed them and made them loads of money, and he's resigning. And I was thinking, why is he resigned? Why would he do that? After doing a little bit more digging, I found out it's probably because of the financial issue that was happening at Atari. So, gone black.
Make us on.
Yeah, I've just got completely gone. Okay, so.
Ready?
Yeah. So, we'd seen the 5200 be completely criticised. It wasn't backwards compatible without an adapter. Didn't really seem worth buying one, to be honest. It couldn't match the 2600's success, and there was pressure from outside companies like Coleco, and ColecoVision was doing really well because their arcade style gaming was amazing and stuff like that. So Atari were just losing more and more money. The more money they lost, the more Warner Communications stocks dropped. For their stocks to be dropping because of what Atari are doing, they're obviously going to look at that company and be like, what's going on? Why are we losing money because of you? Like, what's happening there? They ended up losing about $5 million.
What?
I know, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I could see why they weren't happy with what was going on down there at the time.
Especially at the time of inflation, that's a lot of money.
They decided to sell the company again because it just wasn't doing good. Only, I say again, last time it was Bushnell who decided to sell the company. This time it was Warner Communications who were like, you need to sort yourselves out. So they sold the consumer division of Atari to Jack Tramiel, I think that's how you pronounce his name, from Tramiel Technology. And he halted all projects while there was an evaluation period. Now, the thing about Ray Kassar resigning, I think it's really sad that he resigned, but I also think he was looking at what was happening and he was thinking to himself, ooh, if I don't get out now, I'm going to find myself in a lot of financial trouble. So he took his success and he just got off with it and was like, right, I'm done, I'm out, bye. And just left Atari kind of in the dirt. I think it's kind of a sly move from him, but so Atari, consumers division that works on the whole home consoles and things like that is now owned by Jack Tramiel. So it was halted for an evaluation period so they could sort of figure out what needed doing, what was what with the company, and they just shelved the 7800. They just was like, right, that can wait, and they just left it in the warehouses. It was mad because they built all this stock up to go out and sell, and they just left it in the warehouses ready to go, and it was just sat on the shelves for 2 years. So I think that must have been quite strange to walk into, to see a system that's not been released, just thousands of them. So there's a lot of speculation as to why he shelved the 7800, and one of the common things that people believe, which actually isn't true, is that he shelved it because he believed that home consoles has had their time and that the focus should be shifted to PC. Now, around this time, they did release the Atari ST, which was a home computer at the time, which I was going to talk about. I'm going to talk about in a later episode. So it is understandable why people believe that he thought, oh, consoles have had their time. But actually, that wasn't the case at all. What happened was that there was an issue with GCC's contract, and they hadn't been paid, and really that's Ray Kassar's fault. He should have paid them, and he didn't. So Warner and Tramiel had this back and forth, over who's going to pay who and what's going to happen here and like who's getting the money, what are we going to do about GCC, and like it kind of just overtook everything else. In 1985, Jack Tramiel was like, right, we'll pay them. And around the same time, Atari also sold like their arcade division to Namco as well. So that's actually a pretty good move on their part though. Namco did pretty well from that. So in 1986, it's like, right, all our problems are squashed. We have sorted the money issue with General Computers. We have like sorted the whole thing of getting into a new company. And then they were like, right, we're ready to release this console now. The issue then is that they decided to release it at the same time as the NES. And of course, we all saw what happened there. The NES sort of just took over everything because it was amazing. And they had an amazing marketing team behind them. They had a huge success in Japan. So they had all this, brought it over to the US, and were like, bam, here's our system. And everyone was like, yes, go on, we'll have that. As well, Sega did the same thing, and they also had like a starting in Japan as well, so they already had a following and already had more money, and they come over here and they did it, and didn't do as well, but still did pretty well. Atari joined the race, and they don't have any other sales coming in from any other country. They solely rely on their like American market at the moment, and it just flopped. They didn't market it properly. They only ended up selling 100,000 units by the end of 1986, which sounds like a lot, but Nintendo managed to sell 1.1 million units by the end. So it wasn't a lot at all. They also had an issue with games as well. The 13 games that were announced 2 years ago were coming, but it was only released with 3 instead, which obviously is a huge letdown. And they also had a thing with marketing as well and licensing. Nintendo had this really sneaky scheme that they had going on, where what they do is they find third-party developers and trap them in a 2-year contract so that they could only make games for Nintendo. And this left the market a little bit bare because Atari were making games themselves, but they needed third-party developers and couldn't really find any. They did make some games with Activision though, of course they made some games with Activision.
They're kind of like the mob of the gaming world.
Just a bit. So like, by 1986 we have Nintendo with 20 games for the NES, Sega have released 20 games for the NES, and Atari have got 10. Within a year they've only got 10 games released for this system. Like, it's just not looking good for them. And I do feel really bad for them at this point because Nintendo just monopolised the market and there was nothing they could have done. They were reaching out to third-party developers who were like, sorry, we're taken. And it just wasn't really fair, but it made Nintendo's success, so can't really complain there. Business is business. They're all fighting to be the best. One thing that did happen at Atari though, one little shining light, was that they managed to find a loophole. And it's a pretty big loophole, and it's actually kind of cool. So they realised that they could have third-party developers obtain a license to an arcade game and then make a game from that arcade game and then sell it to Atari. So you think like, oh, they couldn't have done this with things like Nintendo and stuff like that, being around, snooping over. They weren't allowed to release things like Mario Bros because Nintendo owned the license to that. But what they didn't own the license to was the arcade machine. So the third-party developers would reach out to the people who own the license to the arcade games, get a license for those arcade games, create a game based on the arcade games, and then sell them to Atari. So Atari actually managed to release games like Mario Bros, Double Dragon, Commando, Rampage, Xenoblade, and like Kung Fu Master. They were all converted into games, and that's actually like a pretty good thing that they managed to find out about there, because that actually gave them quite a bit of a kickstart to the games and that. So Atari in the US around the 80s, just they weren't doing well. They had their time, 70s, this all flourishing with Atari and stuff like that, and then comes to 1986 and they're just like downhill. And it's sad, but they made all the wrong decisions, to be honest, like shelving the unit for 2 years. If they'd have released that first, it had better technology. If they'd have released that first, it probably would have, well, I think anyway, it might have done better than the NES, but no, because they had all this money issues going on. It's always things going on behind the scenes with Atari that blow them up. It's never actually the systems that they release. I mean, sometimes it's the games, as we saw with the 2600, but it's usually like what's going on in behind the scenes. Like they just need to sort themselves out, but they never do. The system got discontinued in 1991, which is quite a long running time for it. And it did come over to Europe as well, and it had a bit more success over here, much like Sega did, because Nintendo neglected the marketing again. Nintendo looked at Europe, looked at the UK, looked at like places like Australia and stuff, and we're like, well, we're getting all our money from the US and Japan. Do we really need to focus on these places? No, they didn't, which left the gate open for Atari and Sega and stuff. Again, they did okay over here, but not amazing. And I think that's actually quite sad, but 7800 gets a bad rep and it gets neglected. And people think it's only got like a tiny game library, but it's not. I read somewhere that it's got about 60 games for it, and most of the games are pretty good. So I highly recommend to anyone who's just starting out collecting and you want to maybe look at some of like Atari's older games, get a 7800 because you'll be able to get all sorts on that. So yeah, I think I'm coming to the end now. This has been my 2-part special on Atari. Not much of a special in this one, I know, like I should have included the computers, but like I said, they're separate to the consoles. I want to keep PC gaming and console gaming separately, so I'm going to do a whole section on them in the future at some point. So yeah, next week I want to have a little look at some of the underdogs of the gaming industry that were around in the 80s, and I want to look at some of like, I call them honourable mentions because I think they did really well, even though business-wise they didn't. And I think that they do deserve to get mentioned because some people's childhoods actually don't rest in an Atari 2600, they rest in a ColecoVision. So I'm going to be looking at Coleco, like Vectrex, and Intellivision, and just having a talk about them and seeing what they were up to around the times as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week. Game on!